Hello and welcome to the 6th video in our quad build series 4, where we're going to talk about the stuff that's on here, which is the Connex. Now at the end of the last video, what we'd really done is get to the end of the setup of the standard bits and pieces on the quadcopter. The Betaflight F3 flight controller was all configured, the radio was all set up, and we'd even done a little test hover to make sure everything was working perfectly, and it was. So what I've done in between those two videos is I've just popped all the Connex system on this quadcopter, but the Connex system itself is relatively straightforward to put together. It's nowhere near as complicated as I expected. So there are a couple of physical things that we've had to add to the quadcopter. The first of all is obviously this big rubberized pair of antennas at the back. This frame is designed for the Connex stuff. So it attaches with 4 screws that actually come in the Connex kit itself. And what you've actually got here are 2 antenna elements. There's a vertical one that's inside the antenna there, and then there's a horizontal one. You can see the elements inside it on the top there. So it's kind of 2 linear antennas here at 90 degrees to give you a chance of picking up the signal wherever you are. The other 2 things that have been installed onto the quadcopter. The first is the Connex transmitter itself, which is that big silver piece in the middle. That's that big board that we looked at earlier on in the series, and that's why we've been waiting for a frame like this that's designed for the Connex for it to fit inside, because it is physically quite large, so you can't just pop it in any frame like some of the standard analog FPV systems that we've been playing with. And we've got the Connex camera in here too. Now the Connex camera again comes with the kit and is connected to everything via this big kind of ribbon style cable with lots and lots of connections. Now we've seen how those bits have gone together, let me just go through the cabling. So if you're looking at doing this yourself, you can kind of put this together on your own model. So the first slide is just where we left it at the end of the last video. We have our Connex Prosight video transmitter. That's what it looks like at the top. And we had only really wired in the power connector. Here is the flight controller on the right hand side. This is again is the Betaflight F3. We haven't made any other connections off at all. Now in the series so far we've also discovered that UART3 is the one that we're going to have to use for the Mavlink protocol, and we are going to connect the video transmitter to the flight controller because we want all of that telemetry information going into the Connex system, ideally giving us battery voltage and current consumption, potentially other things as well. So the first thing we did was actually connect up the camera. Now the camera itself, if we go back to the desk, it just has a ribbon cable. I'll just bring this in a little bit. You just plug it into the Connex video transmitter at the front, and it has another, hopefully you can see in there, connector at the back of the camera. So you just plug one into the other and the camera is connected. So that takes all of about 2 seconds. The next thing we did then was connect to the antenna. Now the way it works is when you actually install the antenna, there are 2 little flying leads that come out of it. You can kind of see them there at the front, and those flying leads then plug into the 2 antenna connectors that are on top of the video transmitter. Hopefully you can kind of see them there. Those are those 2 brass connections, and they snap home with a nice solid click. So what you do is just plug those 2 in and you've connected up your antenna to your VTX. Just go back to the desk for a second. One of the things that we did, we actually routed the antennas underneath the flight controller on our model here. So they come out of the bottom of the antenna itself at the front. We routed it right the way under the flight controller because there was enough space, because we're using those anti-vibration mounts, and then they came up, and then we've got them routed around and plugging into the side. So again, that was a pretty straightforward job. The hardest thing was just routing the cables around the model itself. Next thing we need to do then is connect the video transmitter to the flight controller for the on-screen display bits and pieces. Now the back of the Connex transmitter itself, and hopefully you can see it there, that's the power connection that we wired in before, and this is the connection for the telemetry. Now this connection here is actually going down and is plugged into the pins on UART3. Now UART3 is actually at the bottom of the board. Just be careful, we've actually rotated the flight controller here in the diagram just so it makes it a little bit easier to understand. There are only 2 pins that are actually doing anything on the cable that comes in part of the kit. Now you get a couple of cables that will plug into the Connex when you open your Connex box, but we've just used one and taken out all of the wires apart from the 2 that it talks about in the manual. One of those wires has to be connected to the ground pin of the UART that you're using. The other, which is the receive pin, essentially on the Connex video transmitter, goes to the transmit pin on UART3. Now Mavlink itself is actually a bi-directional telemetry system, but it looks like the Connex isn't bothered about being bi-directional. It just wants to listen to what the flight controller wants to tell it, and that's fine. So with those connections all made off and the pieces actually put together, again, how you actually assemble the top of this model, this VLX 230C frame, is all covered in the manual, so it's pretty straightforward stuff. We are ready to actually flash not only the video transmitter itself, because we can still access the USB cable at the side, we can also flash the ground station as well. Now Connex has a tool to flash both of these, so what we're going to do is jump onto the computer, let's show you where you get that tool from, download it, and let's flash both of these pieces before we fire everything up and check it's all working. So we've gone on to the Amazon website and we've downloaded the software and installed it onto our computer. Now I'll put this link in the description, but if you go on to the main website or search for something like Connex Prosight Update Tool, you'll find the link to this thing. There's a couple of different versions on here, but we're going to run it on Windows. Now on the desk here we have the 2 parts of the system that we're going to need to update. The first part that we haven't really looked at yet so far in the series is this bit here. Now this is actually the receiver, and you can see why I always say it looks like a robot hand, because when all these things are up, these antennas are straight, that's exactly what it looks like. So at the side we have a HDMI out, that's what's going to plug into our goggles so we can see the image. We have a USB cable that we can use to program it. We have a power cable that will take from 2 to 4S LiPo, has a little XT60 connector on it, and that's what actually powers this little guy. So you're going to have a separate battery to power the receiver. Has a little screw connection at the bottom so you can pop it onto some kind of stand, so you're going to need a tripod or something at the field to use it, and then you have access to the different pieces here and status lights as well. So we're going to plug this in a second using that USB cable. The other part that we've already kind of looked at, because we've been focusing on building the model so far, is the transmitter, and the transmitter also has a little USB cable here at the side that we're going to plug into first. So what we're going to do then is we're going to update both of these. I'll put it in a way that hopefully you can see the lights and what they're doing. Let me put it on the desk. On the computer at the moment, this is what the Connex Prosight version 1.12 is saying, just showing firmware upgrade, no USB connection. So this is genuinely the first time I've plugged this stuff in, so we'll see what happens. I'm going to plug in the USB cable into the receiver. Nothing is happening at all, so I'm guessing what we actually have to do is power this little guy. So let me just plug it into a little battery that I just happen to have here at the side. Okay, we have a light on the side. Let's see if that's going to work any better. That sounds a little bit more promising. Okay, let me unplug that cable again. Still not getting anything on the PC here. It's got it that time. Okay, so it's taken us a couple of times to plug this guy in, and we definitely need to have the power connected as well. So that's the trick for that bit. On the screen then we can see it says it's a ground unit. The firmware version is out of date. We're on 5.2.2 now, and it's 5.0.26. So what we'll do is we'll click upgrade. Download the software from the Connex bits and pieces, and then hopefully it's going to flash it. I'll just keep everything on the screen. I'm not going to shorten anything, so if you come to try this yourself, you'll know how long it takes, because I know how nerve-wracking this can be when you're trying to do this for the first time, particularly when you've spent £350 or such on this system. Okay, looks like it's reasonably stable now, and it's just pushing up the firmware update. We have no LEDs at all at the side, and it looks like it's having several disconnect and reconnect cycles as part of the firmware flashing. And this is taking a jolly long time actually. The firmware is going in really slowly. So what I'll do is I'll fast forward this last little bit. If there's anything exciting happens, I'll come back. Failing that, we'll jump right to the end and we'll see it all when it's finished. So here we are coming to the final last couple of percents, and there hasn't been any more reboots or anything. It's just sat in here gently counting up. So this will take a couple of minutes to get into this little receiver. So turn that off. That's a really stiff connector on this. And unplug it. And actually you heard it disconnect when we unplugged it as well, so that's definitely what you need to do. You need to have it powered if you're going to flash it, which is fine. Right, let's see if this little guy is going to work. Hopefully it's going to power up without us having to apply power to the entire copter, because that wouldn't be great. So let's plug this transmitter in and see if we get anything. Nothing at all. Interesting. Okay, so it looks like we're going to have to apply power. This isn't a particularly great way to do it in my humble opinion, so let me power on my radio. And the reason I'm going to do that is I just don't like turning on a model without having those pieces installed. So we've got the power, we've got everything else. So here we go, first time plug in for the transmitter. We have we have lights on the side, those little two green lights. So I'm guessing that means it's tickety boo. Let's plug it in. Okay, again the air side needs to be powered. So again we're way out of date. Let's do the upgrade. See how long this one's going to take. Oh, it's telling me that the update failed. Okay, let's unplug this little guy. And we'll plug it in again, try it once more. Now it's telling me there's a problem with the device. We'll do upgrade. Let's see if it's going to be okay. Failed. Okay, so this is one of those wonderful little situations that you occasionally get where you try and do something and it doesn't work. So let me just put the camera away for a second while I fight with this, and we'll come back and have a look. So luckily, after plugging in the Prosight transmitter again, it did find it and it did go through the update. So we're finally at the point now where we can just power everything on and have a look. Now obviously, to view the image in a decent way, we need a screen that's 720p. So the screen that we're going to use is the one from the Fat Shark transformer goggles. This is actually one I'm probably going to fly with as well. This has just got the adapter on the back for the battery. This is the 18650 battery headset adapter. So we'll use that. The nice thing is it has a HDMI in, and we can plug in the HDMI cable that comes as part of the Connex system into the side of that display, and then hopefully I'll show you this thing all working. Now the other thing we need to do, of course, is power up the receiver, and we also need to power up the quad. So the first thing I'm going to do is, let's just turn on the radio. Let's power up the quad. looking at the wall, so it isn't going to be particularly exciting. We need to power up the receiver with its own little battery. So there's an awful lot of additional batteries with this little guy. So now the receiver is going to power up. There's the light to say that we are in business. And then finally, we'll turn on the screen. So we'll just plug the power connector in the side. And there we are. We are looking at the screen from the Prosight itself. Now on here, if I just cover up the camera with something black so that you can actually see what you can see. There we go. So on the actual display itself, you can see that we have the name of the device up in the top left hand corner. I'm going to change that to Painless 360. We have the Prosight logo. We can see what mode we're in. So it says stabilization at the moment. If I flick it into acro, you can see it says acro. So the Mavlink stuff is working. I did just change one last thing in the Mavlink settings for UART3 that we've plugged the telemetry cable into. I changed the speed to 5700, so just make sure that you've got it on 57k for the Mavlink and that'll work. You can see at the moment I think that's the amperage that's going to be pulled, the quality. The battery itself is coming from the battery connector, I think, because you get the battery even if you don't have the main pieces installed. And finally, the last thing here is the timer. Now that timer, if you haven't got the telemetry set up, just runs automatically. But if you haven't got it, if you have got it connected like we have here, then it starts the timer running when you get there. Last thing I'm going to show you. So to access the menu in this, you can use the 3 buttons on the side of the receiver. The top button gives you the menu, the next button is kind of an enter key, and the third one at the bottom is kind of select. So if we just, I'll show you that, it just goes round all the way. So if we just go into setup, highlight setup and go enter, that allows us to change things for the camera, for the status, for the regional radio frequency settings, the on-screen display, we can change that as well. If we go in here, we can change what we see depending on whether it's our drone or we're watching somebody else. Let's go down to the bottom, go back, and you can also do things like check your power alert and set up your Bluetooth too. Now Bluetooth is the one I want to show you, because the Bluetooth pairing code by default is 6 zeros and the Bluetooth radio is on. So you can actually navigate all of this without having all of the messing around with these little buttons on the side. So let me just send it back. Go back to the very top, there we go. So what you can do on your phone is you can actually go and download an application. And that application allows you to then connect to the system wirelessly. So if you search for Connex, you'll find it. So at the moment you can see all the settings that we've got. But one of the real cool things is you can actually set it here. So using this little display, I can actually, using the Bluetooth setting, I can decide what I want to change. And this is a much nicer way of doing it than the other way, using the buttons on the side. So there we go, we can flip video. Let's go back. We can look at the status, there's the link quality, all the other bits and pieces. We can look at the on-screen display bits that we looked at before, the power alerts, what we're using. We're actually probably going to run this from a 3S battery, so that will be better. And there's all the other pieces too. So that is very quickly how you connect this system onto your flight controller. The trick is use a UART, set it for Mavlink, wire it as we've said, and then you should all be working. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. We try and release at least 2 videos a week, usually a quick tip on a Tuesday and a more in-depth video on a Friday, and sometimes we manage to get a few more out as well. If you're interested in radio control, then the playlists are useful to have a look at. Anything that's called Introduction To is an organised set of videos that teach you from first principles about the subject that you're interested in. But we also have information about the majority of popular open source flight controllers, how to build quadcopters, fixed wing models, reviews, setups, unboxing, all kinds of things in here as well. So if you haven't already had a look at the playlist, then I'd recommend going and have a look through here to see if there's anything that takes your fancy. Finally, we do also provide updates through things like Twitter, Instagram, and also post all of our 3D designs on Thingiverse as well. So if you like what we're doing here on YouTube, have a look at those things and subscribe to us there, and you'll find out what we're up to in advance of the videos coming out here on the channel.